So let us go right to it and ask, will you be seeking the office of presidency of the United States?
And the answer to that, I will simply say we will soon be announcing an exploratory committee. And after that, I will see what happens over the next 2 months. If, in fact, I get a lot of support, and all those thousands of people who said that they're going to be right there are actually there, then I will announce in May that I'm running.
Dr. Carson, your middle name is Solomon, and when your parents gave you that name, did they have any idea that you would quote so much from the book of Proverbs in your life?
Well, I think it kind of demonstrates that the good Lord has a sense of humor, because he knew that I was going to have an affinity for Proverbs, because when I was 14, I almost stabbed another youngster. I think many people probably know that story. And I locked myself in a bathroom, and I started contemplating my life, and I recognized that had that young man not had that metal belt buckle on, he would have been killed or seriously injured, and I would have been on my way to jail or reform school. And yet, I never was able to control my temper, and I just fell down on my knees, and I just said, Lord, you got to help me. And there was a Bible. I picked it up, and there were all these verses about fools. And it seemed like they were all written about me. And there are also all these verses about anger, like Proverbs 19:19. There's no point getting an angry man out of trouble, because he's just going to get back into it. But encouraging verses like Proverbs 16:32, mightier is the man who can control his temper than the man who can conquer a city. And I stayed in that bathroom for 3 hours, reading and praying and contemplating. And I came to a realization while I was in there that to lash out at people, to punch somebody in the face, is not a sign of strength, it's a sign of weakness. It means that you can easily be manipulated by other people and by circumstances. And it's also a sign of selfishness, because it's always about me, my I, somebody's in my space, they took my thing, or whatever. And if you can learn how to step out of the center of the equation and let it be about somebody else, it really gives you a totally different perspective, and you virtually never get angry. It's virtually impossible to make me angry. Only my wife can do that. No one else can do it. But it has come in extraordinarily handy recently, because a lot of times when the press is trying to get your goat, they try to, it doesn't affect me in any way whatsoever. So it makes a big difference.
Before we get to some of the contemporary.
Oh, I forgot. So that day, I started reading from the book of Proverbs, and have started and ended every day since then, reading from the book of Proverbs. So that's why I think God knew for that they should give me the middle name Solomon. But also, when Solomon became the king of Israel, do you remember the first thing he did that brought him great acclaim? 2 women claimed to be the mother of the same baby. What did he advocate? Divide the babies. That's when I became well known, when I divided babies too.
When you were growing up, you weren't a great student, and your mother said, turn the television off, a lesson for us all. Turn the television off and start reading. And the reason I wanted to ask you about this so early in the interview was because literacy has been such an important part of your life, and something we wanted to impress upon the audience, that you attribute a lot of your success and where you went in your life for the fact that you started reading. Initially, I think it was animals.
Yes, I loved animals. My mother was wise enough not to dictate what we had to read. So I loved animals. I read every animal book in the Detroit Public Libraries. And then I went to plants, and I read all those. And then I went to rocks, because we lived near the railroad tracks. And what is there along the railroad tracks? Rocks. And I started reading. I started bringing boxes of rocks home, getting out my geology books. I was still the dummy. That's what everybody called me. Nobody knew about this project. But I became a rock expert. And one day, the 5th grade science teacher walked in. He held up a big black shiny rock. He says, does anybody know what this is? Well, I never raised my hand. I never answered any questions. So I waited for one of the smart kids to raise their hand, and none of them did. So I waited for one of the dumb kids to raise their hand. None of them did. I said, this is my big chance, and up with my hand. Everybody turned around. They couldn't believe it. Carson's got his hand up. This is going to be good. And the teacher called on me. I said, Mr. Jake, that's obsidian. And there was silence in the room because it sounded good. And they didn't know whether they should be impressed or whether they should be laughing. And finally, Mr. Jake said, that's right, it is obsidian. And I said, obsidian is formed after volcanic eruption. The lava flows down, it hits the water, there's a supercooling process, the elements coalesce, the air is forced out, the surface. They were all staring at me. I mean, they couldn't believe all this geological information spewing forth from the mouth of the dummy. But I was perhaps the most amazed person because it dawned on me in that moment that I was no dummy. And I said, the reason you knew those answers is because you were reading. You're reading the books. And I said, aren't you tired of being called a dummy? I said, what if you read books about all your subjects? Can you imagine what the effect would be? And from that point on, no book was safe in my grasp. And my mother didn't have to make me read. She would say, Benjamin, put the book down and eat your food. I was always reading. And in the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who used to laugh and call me dummy, who were now coming to me saying, Benny, 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 how do you work this problem? And I would say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you.
You said in taking on ISIS, and I'm hoping I'm quoting you correctly, you said, we need to destroy them first, and I wouldn't tie their hands. Explain to this audience why you said that.
Well, first of all, recognize that all of these radical Islamic terrorist groups are very, very dangerous. And they have a vision of world domination. They're much more dangerous than Al-Qaeda was 10 or 15 years ago when we went into Iraq. They're much more dangerous than Saddam Hussein ever dreamed about being. And we make a huge mistake by downplaying their significance. So right now, they are growing rapidly. They're spreading their roots, they're spreading their branches, they're recruiting, and at a much faster rate than anybody ever anticipated. If we let them go for a few more years, they may be beyond a point where we can stop it without nuclear war. And so what I would do, recognizing that, is let our military, what the chief executive is supposed to do is design the mission for the military, not to micromanage the military. So you design the mission for it. And they have to then execute it, but they have to know when they're executing the mission that you have their back, that you're not going to be coming and second-guessing what they're doing and saying, you committed a criminal activity, you should have done this and you should have done that. No. I've got to tell you, I have a lot of military friends, and I tell you, when in the heat of battle, if you sit there and say, let's see, if I do this, then I might be in trouble with the ACLU or with, you're dead, just like that. You don't have time for that. And we need to make sure that our troops know that we've given them a mission and we have their backs. And if they know that, they will get the mission done. No question about it.
I want to bring you back to your work. Many people have said you are the best pediatric neurosurgeon on the planet. Also a man of great faith. How do you square your religion and science in your world?
I don't see any conflict. There are a lot of people in the scientific world, they get all these degrees behind their name, and they try to rearrange the letters and make them spell God. But, I realize that there really is a God. And I simply don't have enough faith to believe some of the things that they believe, but I don't criticize them for that. I mean, they believe that something came from nothing. I don't see any evidence that something comes from nothing. But it's okay if people want to believe that. And then I get criticized a lot. They say, you say the earth is 6,000 years old. I never said the earth was 6,000 years old. I don't know how old the earth is. You know, the Bible says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, period. Who knows how long it was before the next sentence started? Could have been a day, could have been 10 billion years. Who knows? But then God, if God creates something, he can create it to be any age he wants it to be. He doesn't have to start from scratch. That's why he's God, and they're not. But see, they don't understand that. If they can't do it and they can't explain it, then it doesn't exist. And I say to them, you're welcome to believe that. The same people say there was a big bang, and all of a sudden we had this perfectly organized universe, our solar system, so accurate we can predict 70 years hence when a comet is coming. And yet, I say to these people, you believe in the laws of thermodynamics, right? Including the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, which says things move toward a state of disorganization. And yet you're saying there's an explosion and everything is perfectly organized? How does that work? And they say, well, we don't understand everything. I said, eventually they get to the point where they say, well, it's probability theory. If you have enough explosions over a long enough period of time, one of them will be the perfect explosion, and everything will be perfectly organized. And I said, so what you're telling me is if I blow a hurricane through a junkyard enough times over a long enough period, after one of them, there'll be a 747 perfectly formed and ready to fly.
The Chinese and the Japanese both have a mantra that they will not turn to the state to care for their parents. It is their duty to see that through. Mm-hmm. Do you see that happening in this country, where we'll break away from the chains of government handouts and start caring for our own?
Well, that's certainly something that I've been talking about a lot. You know, we are a generous people. We are a caring people. Interestingly enough, we're different than other nations of the world. We are the impetus for socialism, however. You know, the Europeans, they looked over here and they saw the Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, Carnegies, Mellons, Fords, Kellogg's, people with huge amounts of money, and everybody else, and they said, you can't run a country like that. You got to have an overarching government that receives the funds and then equitably redistributes it. Ever hear anything like that before? And, you know, so that was really what started the whole socialist thing. But what they didn't realize about this country, all those people I just named, Fords, Kellogg's, Vanderbilts, instead of like the rich people in Europe who just, you know, hoarded money and passed it down from generation to generation, they built the infrastructure of this country. They built textile mills and factories and seaports and created a mechanism for the development of the most dynamic middle class the world has ever seen, which helped rapidly propel us to the pinnacle. As late as 2009, 40 of the wealthiest families in America pledged to give away half of their wealth to charity. Go to Europe or South America or Asia and ask the 40 wealthiest families to do that. They'll look at you like you got 6 heads. You know, we are the ones who are at the front line whenever there's a disaster in the world to give away things. And so why wouldn't we take care of our own people? You know, in 2006, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize for his micro-lending program, lifted millions of people out of poverty in Bangladesh and that part of the world. It was really a matter of investing in your fellow human beings, and it worked. 97+% of those people have given back the money that they borrowed through that micro-lending program. We're just as smart as they are, and we can figure out wonderful ways to invest in our people. Because what we don't want is a bunch of people who are dependent. And see, I believe that a lot of people in the dependent class would happily take a good job that really had some upside promise to it. You know, the problem is in 36 states, you can get as much or more money by getting handouts as you can by working a minimum wage job. And we have to begin to change that attitude. We may have to start finding a way to have people work for those benefits instead of just receiving them. You know, if they're working for those benefits, then pretty soon they're going to say, well, look, if I got to work to get this, then maybe I ought to go to school and I can even get a better job and I can make even more money. And while you're working, you begin to make connections, you get skills. Those are the things that actually allow you to move up the ladder. So we have to move away the things that create dependency and increase the things that allow us to invest in our fellow human beings. And if we do that, I think we're going to see a tremendous resurgence. And people will begin to feel better about themselves. And, you know, it also goes back to breaking cycles of poverty. You know, you look, for instance, at our inner cities. You know, in the African-American community, 73% of babies are born out of wedlock. In many cases, this is intergenerational. That's the only thing that they know. Your mom did it, your grandma did it, it's just the way it is. We have to break that cycle. How do we break that cycle? Business, industry, Wall Street, churches, community groups. You begin to work together, create reliable daycare so that women can go back to school, get their GED, associate degree, bachelor's degree, even a higher degree, learn to be self-sufficient, learn to teach your children to be self-sufficient. That's how you begin to break cycles of poverty. You'll never break it with government handouts. These are the kinds of things we have to think about because bottom line is, it is not the government's responsibility to take care of the indigent. It's our responsibility.